Hello, everybody, and welcome back. So many people are looking to save some money on their grocery budget and are looking to cook meals as budget friendly as possible. So today I decided to put together an entire budget meal marathon. So get ready to sit down, get a cup of tea, and enjoy the next couple of hours of full budget meals. And I hope you come out fully inspired. If this is content that you enjoy, make sure you hit that subscribe button because I am constantly coming up with more budget meals and more budget challenges. So make sure you sit back and enjoy. So today I am going to start off with a pot pie recipe. I was going to do chicken, but I forgot to take it out to defrost. So now I'm going to be using beef that I canned up a little while ago. Chicken would be a more frugal dinner option. The beef is expensive these days. However, I got this on a really good sale a while ago. I picked up a lot of it and I canned it up. So this is still a frugal option for my family. But if you are looking for a more frugal option for your family, chicken might be the way to go. You can do a whole chicken that you get at the store, or you can get some canned chicken at the store. You do what's on sale and whatever works for you. So it kind of goes without saying that if you grow your own garden and you can get a lot of those vegetables from your garden, this is going to be a more frugal meal by far. But if you can't, then keep an eye out for those sales. You can use up whatever vegetables you have in your fridge, which is great. I love meals like that where you can just use whatever vegetables that you have left behind that need to be used up and you can just throw them in there. So a lot of what I am going to be using are vegetables that I've canned up this summer, or as with my carrots, I canned them up last year and these are the last of them, so I need to use them up. So they're going to go in this meal tonight. And then I also have some corn that I canned this year. I have some dehydrated zucchini, and then I'm going to use some of our potatoes and obviously my beef. I'll show you how I make this pie so you can do yours at home as well. So I'm going to start off chopping up some of the garlic that we grew this year, as well as one of our onions. So when it comes to garlic, I say just measure with your heart. You could use a couple cloves for this, but we love garlic in our family, so I'm going to be using all 4 cloves. So I decided to do these frugal meals because I know a lot of people are struggling with the rate of inflation these days and finding good, healthy meals that are still frugal and cheap enough to fit into the budget. So I thought I'd share the ones that we use in our family to help beat inflation and stay on top of things. And a pot pie is one of our favorites for sure. So one of the reasons why I love a pot pie is that you can use all the cheap vegetables in it. The root vegetables, celery, which I actually don't have right now, but any vegetables that you happen to have around, you can just toss in there. You can also use whatever meat is available and on sale. So if you find a great sale on beef, use that. You find a great sale on chicken, use that. You could probably even use beans in this recipe. I am just starting to brown my onions and my garlic in my cast iron pan, and while these are starting to brown, I'm going to get my potatoes chopped up. So instead of using the potatoes that I grew myself, I'm actually going to use the potatoes that I had left from the Extreme Budget Meal Challenge that I did a little while ago. If you're interested in watching that video, I'll link it down below. It's where I did an extreme challenge of meals for my family for a week for $50. So if you're interested in watching more frugal meal ideas or canning ideas, make sure you hit that subscribe button and I will show you all of our suburban homesteading and frugal ideas that we have here. All right, I have my potatoes in the frying pan and they're cooking up with the onions and garlic. And because all of my other ingredients are cooked in the jars, I'm not going to put them in just yet. So while these are cooking, I'm going to get started on my pie crust. All right, so I have 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour in my mixing bowl. I'm going to add about a teaspoon of salt. And then I'm just going to mix that in. And I'm going to add 1/2 cup of lard. There we go. Now I'm going to get out my fancy dancy pastry. I don't even know what the name of this is. If you know what the name of that is, let me know in the comments. I know it's for pie crusts and cutting up the lard. I couldn't tell you what the name of it is though. So we're just going to mix this in until it's kind of small, crumbly bits of lard in the flour, about the size of a pea. So that is what it should look like. You can see these little bits are just pretty small, about the size of a pea. And that's about how small you need them. And then we're going to add some nice cold water to this and mix it up. All right, so we are going to add about 8 tablespoons of water, but not all at once. We're going to add a little bit and stir that in. I know pie crust can be really intimidating sometimes, but once you get in there, get your hands dirty and get it done, you can realize that it's really not that hard to make. And the taste difference between this and the store-bought pie crust is just unimaginable. It is so much better than any store-bought crust you could get. There we go. So I'll add a little bit more, but this is pretty much the consistency that you're going to want it so that you have a nice flaky crust. I just want to be able to grab up all those little bits on the bottom. All right, so I am going to go get some flour to flour my surface so we can roll this out. Okay, so I'm just going to throw this down on my counter. I want a big enough spot where I can roll this into a circle. So I'm also going to take some of this, throw it onto my rolling pin to keep it from sticking. I'm going to take half of my dough, throw a little flour down on it, and we're just going to roll it out. So I know other people make, more elaborate pie crusts or prettier pie crusts or whatever, but this pie crust is great if you're a beginner pie crust maker. And you know what? Not all pie crusts have to be pretty. As long as they're edible and they taste good, that's all that matters. You don't need to do all the decorations. I mean, the decorations are lovely, very nice, but they are not a necessity. And I know when you are trying to raise a family and clean the house and have everything set, having that time to dedicate into little decorations can be difficult. So just measure. And what you're going to do here
Just roll it back up onto your rolling pin. There we go. So there is your base. Take any thin spots and you can just move some more dough into that area. Now we'll get our filling finished. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add my canned vegetables. I am going to keep the water in here. I'm not going to drain it out because I need the extra liquid for the gravy. So there's my carrots. I'll add some corn. Now I'm going to add my beef. When you can beef, it just gives it the most lovely texture. It is soft, very tender. I will always can my stewed beef because it just gives it the best texture and flavor. There we go. All right, so we'll just stir this in, and then you can add whatever seasonings you'd like. I think I'm going to add a little bit of Montreal steak spice and some rosemary, and probably a little bit of salt because I do not can my meat or my vegetables with salt. I'm going to salt that fairly liberally. And I forgot to add my dehydrated zucchini. I did this dehydrated zucchini in a video a little while back. I will link that down below. My friend had a crazy amount of zucchini come up, so she actually filled my car trunk with zucchini. So this is part of what I did with it. And it is so handy to be able to just throw that in there. So this zucchini will soak up some of this liquid as well. Okay, so I'm just going to add a little bit of steak seasoning and a little bit of rosemary. You can add, obviously, whatever herbs and spices your family enjoys, but I do find that these two spices go really nicely with the beef. Okay, so I'm just going to stir this together. I'm going to let it come up to a simmer just so that the flavors can meld together. And then I'm going to get some cornstarch and water ready so that I can thicken up this gravy a bit. And then we'll stuff our pie. All right, so my ingredients here are just starting to simmer. So I am going to add this liquid, my cornstarch and water, and this will help to thicken up the gravy. You're going to want to stir this fairly continuously just to make sure that all of the gravy thickens up and you're not going to get any clumps or lumps. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to let this come back to a simmer, and by then the liquid should be fairly thick by that point and be ready for our pie. Right, while we are waiting for our ingredients to come to a simmer, we are going to get the last half of our dough rolled out. So, get every last little bit there, and cover this with flour so it doesn't stick. And this will just be the top of our pie. So you can also get your oven preheated to 350 degrees, because once we have our pie filling in the pie, we'll be able to toss it right into the oven. All right, we are ready to fill our pie crust. The gravy has thickened, and this is a nice hearty meal. So this meal, because I grew and canned a lot of what is here, cost me about $8 with all the ingredients. Oops. Move this a little bit closer so we don't go losing things in my oven and my stove. So these prices may vary for you, especially again if you happen to use less costly ingredients like chicken or beans. You could probably also do a pork pot pie for all I know. Not that I've ever experimented with that. So I'm actually going to have some filling left over as well, which is going to be nice. So that's a pretty topped up pie. All right, I am going to go get my top crust and we are going to finish this off and pop it in the oven. All right, so this, got my pie crust all on my rolling pin. I'm just going to roll it over top. There you go. Just like that. And then you can take a pair of scissors, cut off any dough. So you can actually roll this dough up, put it in a Ziploc bag, and put it in a freezer. You can save it for other projects, like little mini pies, or if you save enough up, you can save enough for another pie. There we go. Okay, so you're going to want to seal your ends. And that way we're not getting liquid that's coming out the sides. The ends are never pretty. This is not an art that I have really mastered, but I mean, the pie tastes good, so there's that. I'm actually going to do this with a fork. I find that it just works a little bit better for me. You just fork the sides, and it just seals the ends. There we go. So this will easily feed a family of 4, probably 5. There we go. And then on the top, you're going to want some venting holes. So I just take a serrated knife. Oh, I'm still butchering this. Hit that like button if you've ever butchered a pie. Still tastes good though. All right, now what I'm going to do next is actually put an egg wash on the top of this because it just makes the pie crust so crunchy and crumbly and so awesome. All right, so I am going to use one of our chicken eggs. So again, if you have chickens, then this is a much more frugal option. So I know eggs around here are going for like $5 a dozen right now. So it's quite expensive. And if you have your own chickens, you can feed them kitchen scraps. And I mean, my chickens would rather have all the kitchen scraps than have any chicken feed. But it supplements the meal, and then these eggs are pretty cheap, and we have a ton of eggs, which is so awesome. It's definitely never one thing that I run out of, typically giving them away. So you just want to cover your pie crust like this. I know some people will take their the sides of their crust and cover it in aluminum foil for the first like 10 or 15 minutes. I don't have time for that. So I just put it all in at the same time, and I don't fuss about my pie ends. There we go. But we can tell I don't really fuss about my pies. I'm going to get this in the oven for about 45 minutes, and I'll see you when I pull it out. All right, here is the finished product, and it is smelling amazing. I know that it is going to taste wonderful.
Hello everybody, welcome to day 2. So today I am going to be making some pumpkin soup with our carving pumpkins from Halloween. So Halloween was just yesterday, and I'm going to get these carving pumpkins all cut up and put in the oven so I can roast them, soften them, and then I'm going to put them in a soup. So not many people know that carving pumpkins are also very edible. We have 4 of them, so that's a lot of pumpkin. So I'm just going to get these all done up, and I'll show you how I do that. All right, so I'm going to get this guy cut up into quarters probably, and I'm going to stick it in my roasting pan, put it in the oven, and roast it for a couple of hours to make it nice and soft. Nice thing about this is that the guts have already been taken out. So I'm just cutting it up and getting it in some water. about this big. I think I'm only going to fit 2 of these pieces in here. And the rest I might actually throw in my slow cooker. All right, so I'm going to fill this up about 1/4 of the way just so that it will steam my pumpkin, and then I'm going to cover it in some aluminum foil. All right, I'm going to get this in my oven at about 450 degrees. I'm going to check it in about an hour and see how it's doing. All right, so this recipe calls for some onions, carrots, and potatoes. So I will get these chopped up and put into my pot with a little bit of butter just to simmer them down a little bit. And then I will get the rest of my ingredients in. Okay, I've got my vegetables in my pot, and I'm just going to fry them up a little bit in some butter here, cook them down a little bit. Then I will add my broth and my pumpkin. I wanted to add that I did put in a turnip we grew a lot of turnips this year, and my kids aren't a huge fan, but they're easy to hide in soups, so I threw a turnip in here just to hide it. Almost forgot the garlic. I'll get this peeled and get all of these cloves in there. So it's supposed to be 5 cloves, but I'm putting it all. All right, so while this is cooking down, I am going to add a little bit of rosemary. That was a lot of rosemary, but that's okay because I love rosemary. And I'm also going to add a little bit of salt. So, about a tablespoon, I'd say, or 3/4 of a tablespoon at any rate. Just because I'm putting in a lot of vegetable stock, or chicken stock actually, which I have made and canned myself. And I didn't add any salt to that when I was doing it, so I am adding a decent amount of salt so that it flavors the pumpkin as well. All right, so I have my pumpkin here. I am going to take about 4 cups of pumpkin out of here and put it in my soup. I also have 2 jars of chicken broth that I canned up. If you're looking to see how to do that, I will link the video below. And I'm going to put these in with my vegetables and with the pumpkin and stir it all up. So since we cooked this, I had steamed it in the oven, it just peels away from the shell really easily. It's a really easy way to cook it. Another really easy way to cook a squash, not necessarily a big pumpkin, but is to put it in your slow cooker. You can just poke a couple holes in it, put it in your slow cooker with a little bit of water, put it on high for 2 hours, and your squash will be cooked through. It's typically what I do, but this pumpkin's obviously a little bit too big for that. So whatever I don't use in this recipe, I am just going to save for another recipe. I can freeze it like this. I also have a dog who just had puppies, and I like putting pumpkin in her meals. So I will probably save some of this for her as well. All right, so I have 2 mason jars of chicken broth.
And you can use any broth. It's supposed to be about 3.5 cups. I actually might not even use all of this. So about 1.5 jars I think I'm going to use. There we go. So that's what this is looking like right now. I'm going to let this cook down a bit and then I am going to blend it up. Right, there's our soup. So if you wanted to add cream or a little bit of milk or even a little bit of sour cream, that would go nice on top of this. But to keep it more on the frugal side, I am not going to do that. I am looking forward on getting some homemade bread and digging into this. It's a wonderful way to use up those carving pumpkins. So welcome to day 3. It has been a really busy day and I need to get something in the oven really quickly. So I am going to do a chicken and tomato sauce pasta. It's not your regular tomato sauce. So what I do in the summer when I have my cherry tomatoes, I throw them in the oven with olive oil, onions, garlic, and an herb of some sort like basil or rosemary. And I roast it all up. And then I put it in a jar, and as long as it's covered with olive oil on the top, it does not go bad. It'll last about a year in your fridge. So this is what I have here. I have the majority of one of my shelves in my fridge are these. So I'd like to get using them. So I'm going to put this in with some chicken in my oven and some cream cheese and bake it all up. I also have some frozen peppers that I'm going to use from the garden this summer. I'm going to get this all baked up, then I'm going to cook some pasta and mix it all together. There it is. This dish is absolutely delicious and a hit with the kids as well. Hello everybody, welcome back to day 4. So today I'm going to do up some slow cooker chili. Alright, so I have these leftover hamburgers that have been sitting in my freezer for a while, and I'm going to use these as the beef in my chili just to get them out of the freezer and as a frugal option. And then I'm going to go get some beans and I'll show you how I make it. So I have diced onions, garlic, a turnip, and some mushrooms in here. I will probably be making this chili a little differently than like a traditional chili just because I like to, once again, add whatever vegetables I have in here. Another good recipe to hide turnips in, by the way. And now I'm going to throw in a home canned tomato sauce. It doesn't have any flavorings or spices in it. Now some diced tomatoes. Now I'm going to get my beans and my beef in here and then my seasonings. All right, I got my beef in there and now a can of black beans. Now I'm going to stir this up. All right, so throw in a couple teaspoons chili powder. I'm going to stir that up. Then I'm going to put this on low. Well, you can put it on low for 6 hours or high for 4. I'll show you what it looks like when it's all done.
All right, here is the finished chili. It is smelling amazing, so I can't wait to be getting into this right now. You can serve this with rice, but I think we're going to serve it with some homemade bread. All right, so I've got my squash here. All I'm going to do is cut it in half. All right, so that there is our squash. So I am just going to take a spoon, just spoon out the guts, and then later I'm going to separate these seeds and roast them up. Squash seeds are just the same as pumpkin seeds. They're full of iron and minerals and make a nice, they actually have a good amount of protein in them, so they make a nice filling snack. You just roast them up with a little bit of olive oil and some salt. I also like to put some nutritional yeast in there, adds a little bit of vitamin B12. So I'm going to get these in a roasting pan and get them in my oven at 450 degrees. Probably be about a half an hour at least until they're cooked enough. Alright, so to cook my squash, like I said, I'm just going to put them upside down in a pan here. I'm also going to put some water in here and cover them with tin foil. It's just a bit of water, not a lot. This helps them to steam, and I find it just helps them to cook easier. And pop this in my oven at 450 degrees. Okay, so while that's cooking, I am going to take my onions and tomatoes. I'm only going to take one onion from here, the big one here, and take it out of my clearance package, and I'm going to cut this up. The tomato I'm going to add last, but I'm going to start getting this in my frying pan and cooking. Alright, I decided to take one of my clearance peppers and add it in as well. So I just washed this. I'm just going to take the seeds out and then just dice it up into small pieces. Alright, so for this recipe, I am going to take the remainder of this sausage out of the casing. So I am just going to take, I've got a serrated knife here, just cutting the casing open. Then I'll just peel it off and stick that in my frying pan and break it up. Alright, so there's all of our ingredients in the frying pan. So just break up the sausage. And then we'll just cook this up. And that will be our filling to put into our squash. Makes for a very nice, nutritious meal. I forgot I also wanted to add one of those tomatoes in. I did keep one of the other ones just in case we end up, I think we're probably going to do like tuna sandwiches at the end of the week. So I did keep that other tomato as it was the better looking tomato. But this just adds one more vegetable to the dish, and I am all about adding as many vegetables as I can into our cooking. All right, so my squash is done. So I'm going to take my filling, fill my squash, cover it in cheese, and then I'm going to stick it back in the oven just to crisp up a bit. And then I'm just going to serve it with some rice on the side. All right, so this is what the final squash looks like. I'm going to scoop some squash and some of the filling out and serve it with some rice. All right, so there is the final product. It looks delicious. And once again, there is leftovers for my husband for tomorrow for lunch. All right, everybody, so we are on day 3. So today I'm going to cook up all of my chicken. So I'm actually going to cook up all of them. I have 6 chicken legs. So I will be cooking all of these, and then I'm actually going to make this into 3 different meals out of this chicken. So I'm just going to cook up all of the legs tonight and serve some of them. I'm going to keep 2, and then I'm also going to keep all of the bones and make a broth out of it for a soup for the 3rd meal. So right now I'll show you what I'm going to do with these. I'm also going to do some roasted root vegetables, and I'm going to make my own barbecue sauce out of condiments that you should have at home.
All right, so for the barbecue sauce for my chicken, you use some ketchup. I always just eyeball this. So it depends on how much you need. So I'd say a half cup to a cup of ketchup. And then a couple tablespoons of mustard. If you had soy sauce, you could put some soy sauce or Worcestershire sauce in here. Worcestershire? Worcester? Not entirely sure how to say that properly. Probably, well, that much brown sugar. You can also use maple syrup. Maple syrup's really good in here, but I also know, my goodness, okay, I also know that maple syrup can also be really expensive. So I had 2 nice big hunks of brown sugar fall in here, so, you know, you can do it as sweet or as not sweet as you like. And then I just add a little bit of Montreal steak spice to mine. You can add whatever spices you want to your barbecue sauce. There we go. So then you just mix this up and slather it on.
So I'm going to slather on this barbecue sauce on 4 of these chickens, maybe 5, just because my husband is going to take one to work tomorrow. But I am going to save a couple of these chickens to do another dinner tomorrow. So I'm not going to worry about seasoning them. Now I'm just going to cut up some carrots and some beets, and I'm going to throw them in a pan here with a little bit of oil and some brown sugar, and I'm going to roast them up in my oven, 450 degrees, until they're nice and tender. I don't worry about the skins on the beets or my carrots when I do this, because when I roast them up, I don't notice any difference within the texture or anything like that. They come out really nice just as is. So I don't worry about wasting my time trying to skin them beforehand. All right, so here is the finished product, a nice roast leg of chicken and some roasted root vegetables. These are delicious. So I'm going to use those bones to make a broth, and that chicken is going to be used tomorrow in another dish. All right, we are on day 3. So I am going to take all the chicken off of the leftover chicken legs, and I'm going to get that cooked up in a bit of a stir fry with a very basic peanut sauce. Then I'm just going to serve it with rice. All right, so I've taken all of the chicken off of the bones, and this is what I have remaining. So I'm going to do this up in a nice peanut sauce with an onion and some peppers and serve it with a side of rice. And that will be our dinner for tonight. The peanut sauce is going to be a very basic peanut sauce because I don't have a lot of the ingredients. So I'll show you how I do that and whip up a nice easy dinner for tonight. All right, so I've got my onions, carrots, and pepper in the frying pan, and I'm going to cook these up while I make a peanut sauce, and then I'll put the chicken and the peanut sauce in together. All right, so here is my peanut sauce. Like I said, it is very basic. I have a cup of peanut butter, a couple tablespoons of water, and a couple tablespoons of vinegar. And if you have any seasonings like some cumin or ginger or some red pepper flakes, that would go really well in here. But I don't have those with this budget, so I left them out. So if you are hearing any whining or crying in the background of my videos, these guys are the reason why we bred our German short-haired pointer, and these are her puppies. They are currently 5 weeks old, and they are playful, but they are also very noisy. So I've got my chicken in here, and I've added in my peanut sauce. I'm just going to let this cook a little bit longer, let all the flavors meld in, and then I'm going to serve it with some rice on the side. All right, here it is. This is smelling really good, and looking forward to having this tonight. All right, so I have got all of my chicken bones in some water here. I'm adding some salt, And then I've got my beet tops and my 1 carrot top added to the pot here. So I'm going to simmer this for about 6 hours and make a nice broth for a rice and maybe maybe I can get a little bit more chicken off of those, but for a soup basically with some rice and carrots. All right, so it is day 5 and I am making a soup tonight. I'm going to boil those bones right now and make some broth. All right, so I've got my broth made and I'm just going to get some onions and those carrots cut up. And there's a little bit of chicken that I was able to scavenge and put in here. But yeah, so onions, carrots, and rice, and we're just gonna make a soup. All right, there is dinner. It is a little bit of chicken with some onions and carrots and rice in broth. So you can throw in whatever seasonings you have, and it should be tasty and at least very filling. We also have enough of this soup to last 2 nights. I made sure to make a nice big batch and we had lots of carrots and rice left. So I made a nice big pot of broth. So we have enough of this soup for 2 nights. All right, so I am starting off by making a soup. I've cut up 1/4 of the onion. I've put in a bit of the frozen vegetables and I have cut up half of the beets and put them in here. Next, I am going to add my beef broth. It is the no salt added beef broth, so I will be adding in some seasonings as well as some salt. Okay, so I just added my lentils and I added the water that it was soaking in as well, just to get some little extra fluid in there, because I will be adding the rice and the lentils will still expand. So I just added in the Italian seasoning and some salt. And again, I'm going to cook this on low for about 8 hours. At about 7 hours, I will add in the rice and this will be a lovely soup. All right, so there's our soup. The beets have turned it quite red, but it smells delicious. So this should be a tasty dinner tonight. All right, so here I have 1/4 of the onion cut up. I have about 1 cup of the mixed vegetables and about 2 cups of those beans that have been soaked and cooked. So we are going to make this into a shepherd's pie tonight. So I'm going to cook this up. I'm actually cooking in a little bit of bacon grease just because I had it left. You can cook it in whatever cooking oil you have and add whatever spices you find desirable. I'm going to be adding a little bit of Montreal steak spice to mine. All right, so I have cooked and drained my potatoes. Now, if you have milk or butter on hand that you want to mash your potatoes with, you can feel free to do that. If not, you can just mash them up like this, using even just a little bit of the water they were boiled in. All right, so I ended up using just a little bit of the cooking water to mash these because they were a bit too dry on their own. But this is the finished product, and this is one of my absolute favorite budget meals because you can put whatever you have floating around in your fridge in here. So the beans are a great protein and the potatoes are a great filler, and there's lots of nutrients in here. So I'm happy with this, and we're going to enjoy this for dinner. Today I am going to be doing a pasta, and I'm going to be using some of those split peas I bought, some of the frozen vegetables, a little bit more of my onion. So I'm going to get the peas cooking and I'm going to do a sauce with it and the vegetables and the tomato sauce. And then I'm going to put it together with the pasta. So I soaked my peas and I've just cooked them. I did the rest of the bag. So I'll probably use about half of what is here and I will make a sauce with it with the tomato sauce. All right, so in my frying pan, I did another 1/4 of the onion. I've got another 3/4 cup of those frozen vegetables. And I also have half of my lentils. I'm cooking this in a little bit of oil and then I'm going to add my seasoned tomato sauce to this. I also cooked up about half of my bag of pasta to go in with the sauce. All right, so here's the finished pasta with the split pea and vegetable sauce on it. Looks like it should be nice and filling, and it's also really full of nutrients and fiber. So it will keep you full for a nice long time.
All right, so for tonight's dinner, I cut up the rest of my onion, I put in the rest of my lentils, and I also cut up and used the rest of my beets. I've got this going in my frying pan with a little bit of oil, and I threw in some garlic seasoning and some Italian seasoning. I am going to cook up some rice and mix this together just for a lentil stir fry. All right, so here is the finished product of my lentil salad, lentil and rice salad. Or split pea and rice salad. So this again is absolutely chock full of nutrients, fiber, and protein, and will keep you full for a really long time. Great way to feed the body on a budget. All right, everybody, so I am back again with another day of cooking. Things have lasted really well so far. I am running low on my frozen vegetables though. The dinners have been really good. We've enjoyed them. I've got 2 more to do, and I've got just enough black beans to get me through, and then I'm actually going to do the last day of leftovers because we have a decent amount of leftovers. Probably some that will last us even more than what it is right now. Even the meals that I have made the last few days, they have also given us, my husband and I, lunches the following day as well as the dinner. So it's really adding up to be a lot of food considering the price that I did spend on it. So I will show you what I'm going to get done tonight. I am doing baked beans and potatoes. So I'm going to stuff potatoes with baked beans. All right, let's get to it. All right, for this recipe, I am going to take a potato for each of us. Just going to stab a couple holes in each side. I'm going to put it in my oven at 450 degrees. I'm not going to wrap it. I'm not going to do anything. This makes the skin nice and crispy, which I love. And I'm going to put it in my oven probably for 20 minutes, and I'll give it a check when it's done. And now I'm going to get my black beans going as well. All right, so I'm going to add a bit of paprika. I'm going to add a bit of garlic powder and a bit of cumin. I'm just going to cook this up, and then we'll stuff our potatoes. Okay, so here is the stuffed potato with the bean and veggie mixture. If you had cheese, you could toss some cheese or sour cream. My kids love this meal, so we will enjoy this tonight. All right, so this is the last night's dinner before our leftover dinner. This is just going to be wraps. I used the last of my veggies and the last of my beans, and I've thrown in some taco seasoning in here, and we are just going to make wraps with what we've got. All right. There is tonight's meal. Again, if you had cheese or sour cream, this would be perfect. But it's just a basic meal for tonight, and tomorrow we're doing leftovers.
Soups are always a budget-friendly meal. They are so versatile and easy to make. You can typically go through your fridge and use whatever produce that needs to be eaten up so there's nothing wasted. Today I'm putting together a vegetable and noodle soup. So I've added onions and celery, and these are some carrots that I canned a couple years ago. I had picked up a 50-pound bag of second carrots that are sold for like hunter's carrots or horse carrots, and I got the bag for like $10, and the carrots that I was able to can up lasted forever. So if you're ever looking for a budget friendly thing to do and you can, go look for second vegetables that just aren't pretty enough to go in the stores, and you'll find really good deals. Being able to can has saved us so much money over the years. It is a great skill to have when you're trying to save money. I'll link my canning playlist for anyone that's interested in learning. So to this soup, I'm adding 2 jars of homemade turkey broth. You can also use store broth, but this is what I have, so this is what I am using. Next, I'm adding some home canned white beans. You can use whatever beans you want. Store-bought beans are fine. If you're using dry beans, you may want to soak them and cook them first. To this soup, I'm just adding a little bit of thyme and a little bit of salt. Sometimes spices aren't in the budget, so just a little bit of salt would also be fine. You can do this soup on the stovetop, but I chose to put it in the slow cooker today, and I just put it on slow for about 4 hours until the vegetables were soft. Next, I'm going to do a Mexican-inspired chicken and rice dinner. I picked this package of chicken up on a really good sale for $5 for 3 chicken legs. The pans I have are not quite big enough, so I'm going to spread this out between 2 pans. I'm going to add 2 jars of turkey broth to these, but chicken broth also works. To the broth, I'm adding peppers that we grew in the garden this year and I have frozen. If you have the space, gardening is another thing that can save you a lot of money. It takes some time and it does take some learning to do, but if you're able to put down a few seeds, grow a few plants, you can save a few bucks here and there. Next, I'm just adding 1 chopped onion and I'm splitting it between the 2 pans. I'm adding a homemade taco seasoning to this dish. So right now I'm putting it in some chili powder and then I will be adding some cumin. Again, sometimes spices are not in the budget, so a little bit of salt and pepper would also do the trick. Next, I'm adding 2 cups of rice into the broth, and then I'm just going to stir it in so that it's all under the broth so it cooks evenly. Next, I'm adding in some sweet corn because this is a Mexican-inspired dish. If you had black beans, you could also add those. These are going in the oven at 350 for an hour until the chicken is nicely cooked and the rice has cooked through. As I'm editing this video, I see exactly how dirty my oven door is, so I know what my project later will be. This dish came out wonderfully and the kids absolutely loved it. Next, I'm going to be putting together an enchilada dish. Typically, cooking with beans is the most budget-friendly thing you can cook with. So finding recipes that are fun and your family enjoys is really important. In this dish, I've cut up 1 onion and I'm using some more of those peppers that I have frozen. I'm also using another jar of the white beans that I have canned, but black beans is typically what is used in this dish. The white beans are just what I have on hand. Using the ingredients you have on hand instead of running out to the store to get the ingredients that a recipe calls for means you use up the ingredients you already have in your house without spending more money. To this mixture, I'm just adding in a little bit of chili powder and stirring it around. So I have some small wheat tortillas, and I'm just going to put a little bit of the mixture into the tortilla, wrap the tortilla up, and put it in my dish. In hindsight, I should have put a little bit of salsa on the bottom of my dish before putting my tortillas in, but I did not do this. So they turned out just fine, but if you're wanting to do it a proper way, I would add in a little bit of salsa on the bottom of your dish. In this dish, I am using salsa and not an enchilada sauce just because I have a lot of salsa on hand that needs to be used up. If you prefer an enchilada sauce, you can absolutely go ahead and either make that or buy that, but this is what I'm using for this dish because it is more budget friendly for me. For this dish, I am using a salsa verde that I had canned up over a year ago. We still have a decent amount of these left, so this is what I'm using in order to use these up. You can use whatever salsa that you and your family enjoy or that you have available to you. So I'm just going to take the salsa and I am going to cover all of the enchiladas, and I am going to just kind of stuff it down the side and make sure that everything is coated in the salsa. You can top with cheese if that is in your budget, but cheese is also quite expensive here, so I passed on that today. They went in the oven at 350 for a half an hour. Next up, I am making a chili dish. Chili is also a very versatile dish where you can use a lot of produce that you may have in your fridge that needs to be used up and just plop it in there. I'm starting with cutting up 1 onion, some celery, and getting it all in my crock pot. I've added some mushrooms to our dish because we enjoy mushrooms, but I know a lot of families do not, so it is an item that you do not need to include if you do not enjoy them. Next, I am adding some red kidney beans that I have had canned. Again, if this could call for black beans or use whatever beans that you and your family enjoy, but these are what I have on hand, so they are what I am using in this dish. I am also adding 1 can of sweet corn into the chili. If ground beef is in your budget, you can also add ground beef or ground pork here. If you do not have a budget for ground beef, adding just more beans would be fine. Next, I'm adding 2 jars of home canned tomato sauce. I'm also adding some chili powder. If you have it in the budget to add some brown sugar in here, that would cut the acidity of the tomato sauce. We like to put rice with our chili. It's a little bit of an extra filler, and the kids absolutely love this. Lastly, I am just doing a baked chickpea and rice dish. This is a very easy dish to put together. I'm using chickpeas and then 1 can of mixed peas. I thought I had 2 cans of chickpeas, but I did not. So we are going to improvise and use the jar of mixed beans. So I'm going to take the beans now and strain them out and give them a rinse. And then I'm going to go ahead and put them on a baking pan. This is a stoneware pizza dish, but it makes the beans nice and crispy, which my kids enjoy. So this is the dish that I'm going to use. You'll want to spread the beans out evenly and then throw on some salt. I've also used some garlic powder in the past, and that tastes really good. We're going to put them in the oven at 450 for about a half an hour until they're crispy. I'm going to go ahead and prepare some rice now as well to go with it. And for our veggie, we're just going to fry up some cabbage. Cabbage is a really inexpensive vegetable, and when it's fried up with a little bit of oil and a little bit of salt and pepper, it's really delicious. I hope you all have really enjoyed the meals that I've prepared today, and if you're really struggling, please make sure you reach out and hit up your local food bank.
So for my first meal, I am going to make a bean shepherd's pie. So I've got these dark kidney beans that have been in my pantry for a very long time, and I want to get them used up. So I think probably over a year now they've been in there, so I'm going to use these. Normally I'd use black beans, but today these are gonna work. I also have these green beans that have been sitting in my pantry again for over a year, so I want to get these used up, so these are also going to go into my shepherd's pie. I don't have any fresh onions, so I'm going to use some dehydrated onions that I've got in my spice cabinet. I am also going to get to use up all of the potatoes that we grew this year. I've only got the little itty bitty bits left, so we are going to use all those up and get those as a topping on top of our shepherd's pie. Alright, so a little while ago, I had gotten 100 pounds of carrots for $24. So I am still going through the last little tidbits of these. I've been keeping them in my fridge. So this is obviously a very cheap vegetable that we can use up in this dish, which is nice because I am trying to keep this as frugal as possible. So because this is actually one of the only fresh ingredients that I'm putting in here, I'm going to put this in first, and I'm going to start getting it cooked in oil. I'm just cutting off the ends. I'm not worrying about peeling them, but I am going to cut off the ends and just cut these up into small pieces. And then I'll get these cooking up. Alright, so while my carrots are cooking, I am going to open this can of beans and my green beans, and I'm going to get them drained and rinsed. Alright, so I have this corn that I canned earlier this season that I'm actually going to drain in here as well and put that in our shepherd's pie as well. Alright, so I have my carrots that I've been cooking in here with some dehydrated onions and a little bit of olive oil. I'm just going to dump the rest of my ingredients in there and get some spices in. Alright, so you can do whatever seasoning you prefer in here. I am just going to throw in a little bit of taco seasoning. Just give it a nice flavor, and then I am going to get my potatoes going. Alright, so these little potatoes are all that I have left from the potatoes that we grew this summer. So I'm going to get them washed up, cut up, and in a pot to boil. Make mashed potatoes to put on top of our shepherd's pie. Alright, so to break down the price of this shepherd's pie, the can of beans cost $1. The can of green beans cost 88 cents. My jar of corn, I canned that when corn was on sale for 12 cobs for $5. So that jar would have cost about 60 cents. And the potatoes I grew on my own. So in total, this meal costs $3.48 because I'm also adding $1 in there because I'm going to put milk and some butter in my potatoes. So $3.48 for a nice big healthy shepherd's pie that will feed my family of 4 and leave leftovers for tomorrow. So I think that's pretty good deal. Very frugal meal, and this is all from my pantry right now. Definitely canning in the summer gives me the option of having fresh, healthy food for a much better price because
smaller cans of corn that you can buy in the store are going for $1.50 right now. So I am saving huge on that. So it's definitely worthwhile to preserve your own food in the summer and to buy local and to get that stuff put by for yourself because it saves a lot of money. Okay, so while my potatoes are cooking for my shepherd's pie, I am going to get dinner number 2 started. So I am going to start off with some canned rabbit that I did. So I'm not even sure how to calculate the price of this because of the feed. I'm going to say this maybe cost $4 or $5 for this. And I'm going to use a jar of tomatoes that are from my own garden from the summer as well, and get this in the oven and get it started to make my pasta dish. So for this dish, you do not have to use rabbit. You can definitely use chicken. And that's what I do normally use, but I do have this rabbit that I'd like to get used up, so that's what I am using today. So I start off just by getting this in a pan. And I'm going to bake this just for a little bit with my tomato sauce, and then that will be the base for my pasta. This is my absolute favorite way to save tomatoes, especially cherry tomatoes. In the summer, I'll put these in a dish, my cherry tomatoes in a dish with onions and garlic and olive oil and basil fresh from the garden, and then bake them and until they're nice and soft and cooked. And then you can just stick them in a mason jar in your fridge, and as long as they're covered in oil, these things will stay good for up to a year. So again, I'm not sure how to count the cost of this because the tomatoes are free. The onions are from my garden. The basil was from my garden. The only thing purchased here was olive oil. So I'd say, what, $2 for this maybe? For this jar? So I'll use probably maybe the whole jar. We'll see. But this, I love doing this as a pasta. So you can also put cream cheese in this and make it a cheesy pasta. That will obviously add to your cost. I actually do have some cream cheese that I'm going to use because I have to use it up. We had a birthday party a couple weeks ago and I bought cream cheese for that. But we did not use it all, so I would like to get that out of my fridge. There we go. This smells like summer. This is so nice. So I'll just get this going and get some pasta going, and that will be the dish. This is super easy to make and tastes so good. Also a kid pleaser. My children love it. There we go. So I'm just going to get my cream cheese and put in there. All right, so I just have half a block of cream cheese I'm going to use because that's what I need to use up. Normally this would bake longer if you're using raw ingredients, but because my tomatoes are cooked and my rabbit's already cooked, I'm just putting this in the oven to get the cheese to melt, and then I can mix it all together. So I'm putting this in at 450, probably for 15 minutes, until it's all nice and cooked and the flavors are all blended, and then I will get my pasta in there and we can put it away for later. Alright, so I've got my shepherd's pie here. I've got all my base ingredients in there. I've got my mashed potatoes, and I'm just going to put these on top. So once this is cool, I'm going to wrap this up and just put it in the fridge because we're probably going to have this tomorrow. There we go, so we just smooth that out. I love a shepherd's pie because you can just use whatever ingredients you have around, and it almost always makes a great shepherd's pie. There you go. So to go over the cost of this pasta, I'd say the jar of rabbit was probably around $4 if we're going to count the amount of feed. And then the jar of tomatoes and olive oil would be about $2 because all I'm counting there is the olive oil because I grew everything else. And then the pasta, because I got that bag on sale for $1, I'm using half a bag. It will be 50 cents. So we're looking at $6.50 for a meal that once again will feed my family of 4 without a problem and leave leftovers for tomorrow. So again, a great budget meal. If you can find chicken on sale or any vegetables on sale, that is obviously the way to go. But the great way to make your budget stretch is to grow your own food in the summer. Grow whatever you can. Grow it in pots. It makes it so much more cost efficient. Alright, so for my next recipe, I have had this squash sitting on my counter probably for over a month now. I need to use it. So I am going to make an acorn squash soup. So for starters, I'm going to get this in my slow cooker. I'm going to poke some holes in it, put it in the slow cooker with a little bit of water. Cook that for 2 hours, and then the insides will be nice and soft, and I can just scoop it out into my soup. So you can see how much water I've put in here. There's my squash. I've poked holes in it all around it. I'm going to put a lid on, cook it on high for 2 hours. While I'm doing that, I am going to get the rest of my soup ready. Alright, so I'm going to start the soup off with chicken broth that I canned myself earlier in the year. This chicken broth was done with chickens that I grew myself. So this chicken broth is maybe $1. So it's, again, way more affordable when you do things yourself, can it yourself, grow it yourself. You can save a lot of money. So this is nice, healthy broth that I'm going to start my soup off with, about $1, and I'm going to get my soup started here. Alright, so I'm going to use 2 jars of my broth. If I wanted to spread this out a bit more, I would use 1 jar and just add water. Here we go. And then I've got just some dehydrated onions that I had left in my spice drawer, so I am going to use those up. And now I am going to add in some garlic that we grew, and again, some of those carrots that I got from that 100-pound carrot bag. So those carrots are probably worth a couple cents. Okay, so here is our chicken pasta bake. The cheese is nicely cooked, so I'm just going to mash it up here and get our pasta in. Okay. So then you just stir your pasta in. You can put cheese on top if you want. But this pasta is so tasty. There we go. So once that cools down, you can stick some tin foil over it, and if you're going to freeze it, I'd wait to do the pasta and just freeze it with the tomatoes and the rabbit or chicken in there. Again, I'm just going to toss this in the fridge for now, so I will put some tin foil over it and get it in there. Alright, so far I've got the chicken broth, the carrots, the onions. I'm going to add some seasonings now. So I already have my garlic in there as well, but I am going to add just a little bit of garlic powder. I'm also going to add rosemary from my garden. So I'm going to throw in these fresh sprigs. I will pull them out later. And now I'm just adding a little bit of oregano. Now I'm just going to add some salt to taste. And then when that squash is done, I'll get this in here and we'll blend it all up. Alright, so for our last meal, I'm going to do black bean tacos. I'm going to start off with frozen peppers from our garden. So we got a lot of peppers this year. I just chop them up and throw them in the freezer. And then they're great to toss in meals like this. So I'm going to toss in a bunch of these, get my beans, put them in too, and maybe some corn. And then we'll have our meal ready for tonight.
Okay, so the cost breakdown for my soup. So we're gonna say $2 per jar of broth. So I used 2 jars, so that would be $4. The carrots probably were just a couple of cents because I had 100 pounds for $24. So even if you say 50 cents for the carrots, and then 50 cents for the onions. The garlic was free because I grew it, and the rosemary was free because I grew it, and then a couple of cents for the spices, and the squash was $1. So let's say $6 total with all the spices and all of that. So $6 again for another meal that's going to feed the 4 of us and leave leftovers, and it's a really good nutritious meal. So it is, again, frugal meals. You have to grow yourself, buy local in the summer, get your fresh ingredients, preserve them, and that is the best way to have frugal meals throughout the year. All right, so I have got my peppers in there, my corn in there. I drained and rinsed 2 cans of black beans. I'm just gonna get those in there as well. Stir this up, and I am going to go get, I have a taco kit that I got on sale. I believe it was $2.50 when I got it on sale. So that's what we're gonna use tonight. If you want to be more cost efficient, you can always go get your own wraps, which would be maybe $1 for the package of wraps, or if you really want to be efficient, you can make your own wraps. But for ease of use, I got the taco kit for $2.50. So it has the seasonings that I can put in here, salsa, and all the taco shells. And that's just what works best for us. So I'm gonna go get that, and this is what we are gonna have for dinner tonight. So the 2 cans of black beans cost $1 each because I got them on sale. The green peppers were free. The corn cost about 60 cents. So that's $2.60 right now. So $5.10 with the taco kit, and we'll round it up to $6 because I'm gonna put some cheese on these tacos. So $6 for tacos. Again, family of 4, will leave some leftovers. So getting stuff on sale is also just such a huge blessing, being able to go and buy bulk sale items, because then you have those things in your house for a cheaper price than what they may be going for right now.
So when you're cooking on an extreme budget, it is necessary to get creative and to make things last as long as possible. So with that in mind, I'm going to take these 4 sausages and make them last for 2 meals. So again, when you're on a budget, sometimes you do have to eat the same meal twice in a week, and that's okay as long as we're making it taste good. So I'm going to do the same meal twice with this. I'm going to use 2 sausages tonight, save the last 2 sausages, and do it again later in the week. I'll show you what I'm doing tonight, and then it'll just be repeated throughout the week. So I am going to take these sausages, use 2 of them, and make them into a stir fry with some of these vegetables, and then pair them with some of these potatoes. So I'm definitely not using all of these ingredients, as I need these to be used throughout the week. So these will be used, these potatoes that I got for $1 a bag. That was crazy. I'm going to be using these for at least 2 meals, possibly more, but they'll also be used for leftovers for the following lunch as well. So for these meals, I am also assuming that you have some sort of cooking oil and salt and pepper, and possibly spices of your own, but it is not necessary to have those. So I'm just going to start by cutting these sausages up just into little bite-sized bits. Normally I'd use onion in this dish, but I did not purchase any of that today. So we're just going to stick with the sausage and the vegetables. Okay, so I'm using a bit of bacon grease that I had left over, and I'm going to get my sausages right in the pan. As they're cooking, I'm going to get my vegetables ready. Okay, so for the potatoes, I'm just going to cut them up and boil them and leave them like that. They'll be fine with just a little bit of salt on them.
So you're just going to cover your potatoes with water and then we'll boil them until they're soft. Right, so to our sausages, we're just going to add a quarter of the bag of vegetables. Now, the bacon grease that I used and the sausage, the fat from the sausage will give the vegetables a lot of flavor, but I am going to add a bit of salt as well.
And this here is the final product. Not only was it delicious, but there was a lot left so that my husband and I could have some the next day. All right, so it's the next day and we are starting off getting our chicken ready. I'm putting it in the slow cooker and topping it up with some water so that we have a lot of broth to work with throughout the meals. I'll cook this for 6 hours on low. All right, my chicken's been cooking in the slow cooker all day. I've got it here. I'm going to take all the meat off the bones, save half for tonight and half for tomorrow night. All right, we are done shredding the meat from the bones. If you would like a more flavorful broth, you can put the bones back in the broth and just simmer it for another few hours or even for the rest of the day. This is the meat that we got from the bones. So we're going to take half of this and work with it for tonight and half for tomorrow. Here I'm just cutting up some more of our potatoes to go with our chicken tonight. I'm going to boil them again until soft and then just top them with a little bit of salt. All right, here is our dinner for tonight. There's plenty of leftovers for tomorrow's lunch as well. All right, so for tonight's dinner, we're going to do a pasta chicken veggie dish. So to add extra flavor to our pasta, I'm going to do the pasta in last night's chicken broth. And I'll just add the extra flavor that we need to the pasta and to the vegetables because we're doing without any extra sauces or spices. All right, so I am going to take my broth and dump it through a strainer into a pot so that we can get all the small particles out from boiling our chicken. So you can see that this broth looks like it's got a lot of good fats in it and some nice flavors. So this will definitely help to flavor our dish a lot. So I'm just going to dump my pasta into this broth and get it on to boil. I also like to add my frozen vegetables in with the pasta so that they can also soak in the broth, take in that extra flavor and cook all at the same time. All right, so my pasta and my vegetables are done. I'm actually going to strain them out from the broth, keep the broth to do my rice in again tomorrow night to again add more flavor. So we're making sure that this chicken and this broth gets a lot of life. All right, so now that our pasta and my vegetables are strained, we're going to go ahead and add our chicken to it, and then you can add salt to taste. Right, so here is our completed pasta dinner, and there's lots left over, so definitely enough for tomorrow's lunch. All right, everybody, welcome back to our last day. Today we are going to do just a regular beans and rice. We're going to use the beans, the black beans that we got, and the rest of our vegetables. And we're going to cook our rice up in the rest of that broth from the chicken earlier this week. We've been saving it in the refrigerator, so it's keeping really well. We're just going to start by opening our cans and draining them and then getting them in the frying pan. If you have oil at this point, that would be great. Any type of oil or bacon fat is absolutely awesome because it adds a lot of flavor to the dish. So if you have any extra bacon fat, throw that in the pan. We're just going to drain these and rinse them. All right, I've got my beans in the pan. I'm going to add the rest of my vegetables, and then we'll get our rice going. If you have spices like chili spice or taco seasoning or anything like that, that would work really wonderfully in this dish. If you don't, then just add a little bit of salt. All right, so in my pot, I'm going to add the chicken broth from the other night, and we're going to get our rice done up. So that was about 2 cups of rice. I'm going to add this whole thing of rice there. I'm going to bring it to a boil and then simmer it for about 20 minutes. And then I'll put the lid on it so that that rice can soak up all the flavor from the broth. All right, and here is tonight's finished meal. So today I have made 4 depression era meals to show how budget meals can still be delicious. I'm starting off by making some stuffed peppers. Rice and beans were a huge staple during the Great Depression as they were very cheap and easy to make. So that is what I will be making my stuffed peppers with. I'm starting off by getting a half a cup of rice simmering in 1 cup of water, and then I'll let that simmer until cooked. And now I'm just going to get 1 onion chopped up and in a frying pan. Normally I would use a yellow onion here, but the red onions were on sale, so that is what I'm using. To add a veggie to this, I am adding chopped mushrooms. So I'll get these all chopped up and I will put them in the frying pan with my onions. To this mixture, I am also adding 1 can of black beans. So I'll open the can, I'll drain it and rinse the beans and then get them in the frying pan. To this, you can add whatever spices that you have available. So I am going to add a little bit of thyme, some rosemary, and some salt. While that mixture is cooking down, I'm going to get a cooking pan ready. The mixture I made could do multiple peppers, however, my peppers have seemed to have disappeared, so I will only be doing 2 peppers today, but I also will have a lot of mixture left over. So, like I said, this will do a lot more peppers. It would probably do 6 peppers, where I'm just doing 2, but once I get more peppers today, I will absolutely finish doing the peppers. So I'm just taking my peppers right now. I'm taking the tops off of them and making sure all the seeds and the inner membranes are out, and then they'll be ready to fill. Now I'm just adding the rice to my mixture. I'm going to mix it up and get those flavors together, and then I'll be filling my peppers. Once the peppers are filled, I'm going to put them on my prepared baking sheet and put them in an oven at 350 for 30 to 45 minutes, depending on the size of your pepper. You're just going to want to have your pepper nice and soft and cooked. So this is what it looked like after, and I served it with a nice salad. Another staple during the Great Depression was potatoes. They're a great budget vegetable, they're cheap, and they're nutritious. They're also a great filler. So today I'm going to be making some nice creamy potato soup, a great nutritious and filling soup. I'm going to start off by peeling my potatoes. It's supposed to be 4 large russet potatoes. However, mine are small to medium size, so I'm doing about 6 potatoes here. So I'm just going to get them all peeled and chopped and then start preparing the rest of my soup. So I'm going to start off by chopping 1 red onion. Again, I'm using my red onions because I did get them on a really good sale. So I'm going to chop this up and get it in my pot. To that, I am also adding 2 cloves of garlic. After that, I'll put in about 2 tablespoons of butter and a tablespoon of flour to make a roux to make this a nice thick soup. Once that's all mixed together, I'm going to dump in all of my potatoes that I've prepared, as well as 4 cups of either chicken or beef stock. So here I've got some chicken stock that I have prepared and canned in the past. So I'm just going to measure out 4 cups and get it in my pot. Once that's all in, I'll let it simmer until the potatoes are nice and soft. When the soup's done, I'm just going to blend it all up until creamy. And then I'm going to add either a 1/4 cup or 1/2 cup of milk, whatever you find desirable. It doesn't even need milk. This soup is so thick and creamy all on its own. This soup turned out really thick and creamy and beautiful, a great addition to any menu. Another staple through the Great Depression was something called cabbage and noodles, which is just as simple as it sounds. Cabbage is an incredibly budget-friendly vegetable. It's easy to find and easy to grow. Noodles can be either homemade or store-bought, but they are also very budget-friendly. So I've got myself a red cabbage that I'm just cutting up here. I'm also going to add some beans to this recipe just to add some more protein. So I've got some white kidney beans that I will also be adding into this. But for right now, I'm going to get my cabbage onto simmer. I simmer it in just a little bit of water. No oil is necessary here. I do season it with a little bit of salt as well. Next, I'm going to get my beans opened and rinsed, and then I'm going to add them into my cabbage. To a boiling pot of salted water, I am going to add my pasta. You can add however much pasta you need for your family. I'm actually going to double this so that I can save some pasta for the next recipe I am also making. Once it is boiled and the pasta is nice and tender, I'm just going to drain it out, and then I'm going to put it right back in the pot so I can mix my cabbage and my beans in with it. Once this is all mixed up, it's ready to serve. This is a wonderful and very simple meal that is also nutritious and very budget friendly. Next, I am preparing something called the Hoover stew. This was a very popular dish during the Great Depression, and it gets its name from President Hoover, who was in office during that time. It's very simple and requires that you can use whatever vegetables that you have and add it to pasta. A lot of people also add cut up hot dogs to this dish. I personally don't have any hot dogs as we don't eat them very often, so I'm going to be adding some ground beef that I got on clearance. You could also possibly add some ground pork to this. I am also going to be adding canned kidney beans and some canned corn to this as well. So I'm just going to be opening both of my cans here, and then I'm going to drain them and get them in with my ground beef after it has browned. Next, I am also going to be cutting up 3 tomatoes and just dicing them into small little bits, and I will be adding that to the mixture as well. It gives it a bit more of a pasta sauce feeling to it. After I got everything prepared and the beef was browned, I just add my beans, corn, and tomatoes into my mixture and mix it in. And then at this point, you can add in whatever seasonings you have. I know during that time period, seasonings might not have been available or budget friendly enough to have in the house. So salt might be your only choice. But if you do have some seasonings that you would like to add, they can be added here. I added just a touch of basil and some salt to mine. So while this is cooking, you'll also want to get your pasta ready. A lot of people make macaroni pasta with this, although during the Great Depression, it was probably homemade pasta. After your pasta is cooked, you can add your mixture into the pasta, mix it up, and then it is ready to serve. This lasted my family for 2 days. It made a lot. So that was wonderful, and it's good and filling. Being creative with your food, using budget items, and using up what you had were vital during the Great Depression and great lessons for today. For my first recipe, I am going to put together a sausage and pasta soup in my slow cooker. For starters, I'm just chopping up 1 onion. Normally I'd use a yellow onion, but I got these purple onions on sale, so that's what I'm using. To that, I am chopping up a couple of cloves of garlic. You can add as much garlic as you like to this recipe. You always measure garlic with your heart. As with any soups, these are a great opportunity to put in whatever vegetables are in your fridge waiting to be used up. I had a couple of carrots that just needed to be used up, so I am putting these in here as well. I'm also going to cut up 1 whole red pepper and put that in the pot too. Normally, I would put sausage in this recipe, however, I do not currently have any sausage in the house. I do have this salami that needs to be eaten up, so I'm going to cut that up and put that in my pasta. To this, I am adding 2 quarts of home canned beef broth. You can use whatever variety of beef broth you want. Store-bought is just fine, but I have lots in stock, so this is what I'm going to use. To this, I'm going to add some parsley, basil, and oregano, about a teaspoon each. I'm not going to add salt to this because the salt in the salami should keep the soup salty enough. I am also adding 1 jar of diced tomatoes. Now I'm just going to cover it and cook it on low for about 2 hours until all my vegetables are cooked. Always make sure that slow cooker is plugged in. After the vegetables are all cooked, I add about 2 cups of pasta. If you like your soup more soupy, then I'd add a little less. But this turned out just perfect for my family. My kids absolutely loved this soup. Next, I'm going to put together a sheet pan meal. So this meal will consist of cauliflower or a vegetable of your choice, as well as some potatoes and chickpeas. I add parchment paper to my cookie sheet just to make for easy cleanup. First, I'm just going to chop up 1 onion and get it onto my cookie sheet. I'm also going to cut up about 5 or 6 small white potatoes into small chunks. Then I just spread them out evenly over the pan. Next, I take a head of cauliflower and I'm just going to chop it up into small chunks and spread it out evenly over the pan. Next, I'm going to add a jar of my home canned chickpeas. Now I'm going to put all of the chickpeas as well as all of the juice, which is aquafaba, on top of all of this. You could use oil if you wanted, but the aquafaba actually acts as an oil, so this is what I'm going to be utilizing today. So I just made sure that my chickpeas were spread evenly all over this pan. Next, I'm just going to add a little bit of salt all over all of the ingredients. I'm also going to be adding some rosemary. This went into the oven at 400 degrees for about 45 minutes until the potatoes were fully cooked. I personally love crispy chickpeas, so this is a favorite meal of mine. Next, I'm going to be doing a version of my chicken and rice dish. However, I will not be using chicken. I don't have any chicken in the house, but I do have some bacon. This bacon is what I bought on sale when it was $2.99 a package, so I find this to be a very budget-friendly meal. Chicken these days I find can be very expensive, and I haven't been able to find any on sale recently, so I think the bacon will be a really good substitute. I'm just starting getting 1 onion in the frying pan. Then I'm going to take my package of bacon and just cut it up into pieces. To this dish, I'm also just going to cut up a handful of cremini mushrooms. If mushrooms are not a favorite in your household, you can definitely just leave them out or substitute for another vegetable. So I just make sure that I'm constantly stirring my bacon to keep it from burning or sticking to the bottom of my pan. And then I'm going to go ahead and get my mushrooms in with this bacon. The mushrooms will soak up all the flavor of the bacon and they will taste so yummy. I also have half of a bell pepper, so I'm going to chop that up and get that in there as well. I find adding vegetables to any dish helps to bulk it up and stretch it out. Once everything is cooked down a bit, I'm going to add 1 cup of rice to this dish. I'm going to add it in and just let it kind of soak and simmer into the baking fat, as well as it gives it a bit of a saute. After that's been cooking for a couple of minutes, I go ahead and add 2 cups of water. Now I'm just going to stir this in and let it soak and simmer until the rice is fully cooked. This was a really delicious dinner. The bacon totally gave everything a lot of really good flavor. I'll probably do this more than my chicken and rice one now. Lastly, I'm going to be doing one of my favorite dishes. This is a vegan version of butter chicken. Instead of chicken, I will be using lentils. First, I just start by chopping up 1 of my onions and getting it in the frying pan. Next, I'm going to take a handful of these cremini mushrooms and get them all chopped up. Some of these mushrooms were absolutely gigantic. This one here is the same size as my palm. Mushrooms are very meaty in texture, are very filling, so if you're looking for a good meat substitute in some of your dishes, then having a lot of mushrooms in there is really awesome. Normally I don't add cauliflower to this dish, however I had some that needed to be used up, so I'm just going to chop it up and put it in there. I've always mentioned in my videos that adding more vegetables to your dish can bulk it up and stretch it out, as well as adding extra nutrients, so I am always pro vegetable in any dish. I also like to get my greens in wherever I can. I've recently been buying a lot of collard greens. They're very cheap to buy and you get a really good big bunch of them. So I'm adding a handful of those and keeping these stems aside so I can use them in a vegetable broth later. I just stir everything around and make sure everything is cooking evenly. To make the sauce, I'm using 1 pint of my home canned tomato sauce. 1 jar of regular tomato sauce bought from the store is fine as well. And then I'm using 400 milliliters or 1 3/4 cup of milk. You can use whatever milk you have on hand. I find coconut milk to be the best here, but if that's not available, then that's fine. I also add in about 2 teaspoons of salt. I also add in about a tablespoon of garam masala powder. This is an awesome spice blend that I really love. If it's not something you have on hand or something you cannot find, the recipe is online. It's cinnamon, nutmeg, coriander, cumin, and cloves, I believe. Next, I'm going to take some lentils that I've had soaking and I'm just going to drain them and rinse them and get them in with the rest of my vegetables. Once the lentils are in there, I'm just going to pour my blended sauce in and let it simmer and cook until all the vegetables are nicely cooked. This typically takes about a half an hour. This was absolutely delicious as always, and the last dish that I made for this week as we had tons of leftovers. This dish can also be served with rice. There is a decent amount of broth in here. Or you can also serve it with some bread. I just like to eat it as is, but if you like a little extra, then toss some rice in there with it. I am starting off with a family favorite and the original budget meal, which is a shepherd's pie. So I'm starting off chopping up 2 small onions, or you can use 1 medium onion, as well as a couple of cloves of garlic. I get them in my pan with about a teaspoon of olive oil, and I just kind of saute them up until they're translucent, and then I add a pound of ground beef. As it is cooking, I'm going to add my spices. So this is about a teaspoon and a half of cumin, chili spice, and garlic powder, a teaspoon and a half each. Then I'm just going to mix it all in. Now I only had medium ground beef, so I'm just using a couple of paper towels and I'm going to soak up the excess oil that is coming off of this ground beef. So I just put it in there and I soak it up, and then I take the paper towel out afterwards. To add extra vegetables, I am adding just some frozen peas and carrots. These are really budget friendly and easy to add into any dish. Next, I'm going to take about 9 small russet potatoes, but if you have large potatoes, I'd use only about 4 or 5 of them. I peel them and I chop them up into small cubes, and then I get them in my pot to boil until soft. Next, I add a healthy chunk of butter to these potatoes and about a 1/4 cup of milk and a little bit of salt to season. And then I'm just going to get these mashed up nice and smoothly so that we can top our shepherd's pie with them. Now that my ground beef mixture is fully cooked, I'm going to take it and put it into my pan. So you can use whatever pan you want, but I am going to be getting this ready for a family in the community, so I am using a takeaway pan. Now that the meat is in there evenly, I'm going to get my mashed potatoes and just put about a 1/4 inch thick on top, or however much you like. I'm just going to spread this evenly over top of all of the meat. Next, I'm going to grab some shredded cheese. Now this is totally optional, and I'm not going to be using all of this cheese either. But I am going to grab some cheese, put it on top, and then get it back into my oven at about 450 or on broil just until that cheese melts and gets nice and bubbly. This meal will easily feed a family of 6, and it is absolutely delicious. I'm not going to plate this today because, as I said, I am giving this to a family in the community, but when we do make it for the family, it is absolutely delicious. Next, I'm going to be making some potato and corn chowder. So I take 1 onion and 3 cloves of garlic and chop them up and get them in my pot with a little bit of olive oil just to saute up a little bit until they're translucent and the flavors start to come out. Then I'm going to get 4 to 5 large russet potatoes and get them peeled and chopped and ready to go in the pot. Now that my onions and garlic have been cooking for a bit, I'm going to put my chopped potatoes in this pot. To this, I am going to add 2 cups of broth. You can either use 2 cups of chicken broth or 2 cups of vegetable broth. Beef broth works all right as well, but chicken or vegetable is preferred. Now I'm going to be adding 1 cup of drained sweet corn. Next, I'm going to get 2 tablespoons of flour and add it to 1 cup of milk as a thickener. I'm going to stir it in really well until there's no chunks of flour left, and then I'm going to add it into my soup, and this will make the soup into more of a chowder, which is nice and thick and creamy. Before I added this cream, this soup had been simmering for about 10 to 15 minutes and the potatoes were already soft. And then I added the flour and milk mixture. You can also add some heavy cream to this, but I chose not to do that. I seasoned with about a teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of thyme. Then I just let this boil for a little bit more until it got nice and thick, and then I topped it with a little bit of cheese. This was really delicious, and my kids loved it. Next is a dish from my childhood and a dish that my mom made while we were living on a budget when I was younger. It is a tuna noodle casserole. I'm starting off getting my pasta in some boiling water, as well as about 1.5 to 2 cups of my pea and carrot vegetable mixture. I boiled them until the pasta was just about cooked, about 8 to 9 minutes. And then I drained the vegetables and the pasta and got them into, I believe this is a 9 by 12 pan, and just mixed it together. Next, I'm going to take about 2 cans of tuna and I just flake it out onto the pasta and then I mix it in. Now I'm going to take 2 cans of cream of mushroom soup and just empty it out onto this pasta. You're going to make sure that you do mix this in really well so that all the pasta is covered with the cream of mushroom soup. Now, the original recipe for the tuna noodle casserole would call for some breadcrumbs on top before I added the cheese, but I didn't have any breadcrumbs, so I'm just adding some cheese on top of this. And it is just as delicious, so you do not need the breadcrumbs to complete this meal. So you can take your cheese, your shredded cheese, and just add it on top as little or as much as you want and put it in the oven just to crisp up that cheese. This was a blast from the past. What a wonderful dinner. My kids loved it. The whole family loved it. And I saved some for my mom as well. This is definitely a recipe you'll have to try with your family. Next, I'm going to make a recipe that my children insisted go in the weekly rotation of our meals. So I am making a taco soup. I started off with 2 small onions chopped small, put in the slow cooker, 2 cans of black beans drained, and 2 cans of corn drained. I'm also going to use 1 large can of diced tomatoes, and I'm just going to put them all in my slow cooker here. Next, I am adding 2 cups of vegetable broth. You can either use vegetable or you can use chicken broth, whatever you have, but I find that vegetable broth tastes the best. Next, you're going to add your spices. So I add about 3 tablespoons of taco spice. If you do not have taco spice, you just add chili powder, garlic, and cumin powder, and maybe a little bit of paprika in there, and that will be your taco seasoning. So you add as little or as much as you want. I added about 3 tablespoons. And then I just stuck this on low for about 3 hours. This cooked up really nice and fragrantly. I also added a cup of rice to this mixture. I added it in and gave it another 20 minutes on high to cook, just to make it a little bit more stew-like, as I like a thicker soup. But if you like a more liquidy soup, then the rice is not needed. You can add whatever toppings you want. I added cheese, some sour cream, some lime juice, and some tortilla chips, and this was so delicious. Lastly, I am going to put together some lentil sloppy joes, another kid-friendly meal. I am taking 2 cups of water and adding 1 cup of dried green lentils to my water, and then I'm just going to get them on the boil about 10 to 15 minutes until they're nicely cooked. I'm going to take 2 small onions and 2 cloves of garlic and 1 red pepper and chop them up finely and get them in my pan. You can add a tablespoon of olive oil to those vegetables or a little bit of water just to saute them until they're soft. Next, I drain my lentils and I just give them a little bit of rinse just because they did have a little bit of filmy stuff I find goes on the lentils when you're boiling them. So I give them a little bit of rinse and add them into my cooking vegetables. After this, I do add in 1 jar of 15-ounce jar of tomato sauce and I just mix it in with all of the lentils. To this, I also add 2 tablespoons of brown sugar just to add a nice sweetness and about a teaspoon of soy sauce. I also add a teaspoon each of cumin, garlic powder, and chili powder. I mix this in nicely and then I just let it cook for about 5 to 10 minutes just so all the flavors can combine. You can add this to a nice bun, but we added it to some bread and it was so delicious. A great budget-friendly meal. I'm starting off with a family favorite. So for this one, I cut up a bunch of Brussels sprouts. I destemmed them and cleaned them up and cut them in half. And then I'm just going to spread them out on my sheet pan. Next, I have 2 small onions that I cut up and I'm going to spread that along in my Brussels sprouts and just get them nicely mixed together. Next, I'm going to take a tablespoon or so of olive oil and just drizzle it all over my Brussels sprouts and onions. To season, I am using just some salt and some pepper. Once those are on, you can just mix together the onions and the Brussels sprouts and all of the oil and the salt just to make sure that it's evenly spread out. Next, I have a few sausages that I have cut up and I'm just going to drop them in and spread them all throughout my Brussels sprouts and onions. This goes in the oven at 425 for 20 to 30 minutes or until the sausage is fully cooked through. This came out beautifully, the sausages browned up nicely, and I just added some rice to complete the meal. Next, I have another family favorite that is so easy to prepare. We are doing a nacho dish tonight. So I'm taking a bag of tortillas and I'm just spreading them all along the bottom of my sheet pan to make a nice base layer. Nachos are so versatile that you can use whatever ingredients that your family loves. For me, I am taking some onions here and spreading them all throughout my nacho dish. I will be doing 2 of these dishes, so I am not using everything that I have prepared in my bowls just on this one sheet pan. Next, I'm going to take some ground beef that I have previously fried up so it's nice and cooked, and I'm going to spread that all over the top of my nachos. Next, I'm going to take some mushrooms that I have cut up into small pieces. These are brown cremini mushrooms, and I'm going to spread that all over the top of my ground beef. Next, I'm going to take some black beans that I have drained and rinsed, and I'm going to spread some over the top, probably about a half a cupful. Now I'm just going to take some corn and add it all over the top of our nachos. I'm being careful not to add too many of one ingredient and to not overload my nachos because then the bottom of my nachos will be more soggy than crispy. Now I'm just taking a homemade taco seasoning and I'm just spreading it all over everything. So in my taco seasoning, I have chili powder, garlic powder, paprika, and some cumin. Now I have some peppers that I'm going to add. These are green peppers that we grew in our garden this year and I just froze up in chunks. So now I can just take them out whenever I want and put them in whichever dish I am making. My family also really loves olives, so we are going to be adding some black olives just to the top of this mixture. Finally, we are adding cheese. So I have shredded up some old cheddar cheese because that is what I had, but you can use any cheese, whatever you like, some mozzarella or a mix. Anything will work on this dish. This goes in the oven at 450 for 10 to 15 minutes or until things are nice and bubbly and brown. These nachos can get served with whatever condiments you like sour cream, salsa, or guacamole. They are absolutely delicious. Next, I'm putting together a chicken dish. So I am starting off by chopping up 2 yellow onions and spreading them all over my 2 sheet pans. Now I'm going to take my potatoes and cut them up into small cubes. If you have russet potatoes, they do take a little bit longer to cook, so you can either pre-cook these or just make sure that they're in small cubes. And I'll just spread these evenly all over my pans with the onions. Next, I'm taking a couple of zucchinis and chopping them up into discs and then having the discs. Now these do cook quickly, but they'll also caramelize when they're in there for a longer period, which is really tasty. So that's what we're going for in this dish. Now I'm just going to spread these evenly throughout my pan with the potatoes and the onions. I have some chicken breast chunks that I got from the store here, but you can also just cut up some chicken breast, or you can also use chicken thighs here. Both are delicious. But if you use chicken thighs, it will take a little longer for them to cook through thoroughly. So I'm just spreading my chicken over top all of my other ingredients and just evenly placing them throughout the pans. After that, I'm going to take a couple tablespoons of olive oil and drizzle it evenly throughout all of my ingredients. Now it's time to season my dish, so I'm just taking some salt and spreading it over top. I'm also taking some chicken and rib mix and just putting it all over the top of my chicken. Now I'm getting these in my oven at 400 for a half an hour or until the chicken is cooked and the potatoes are fork tender. This meal was absolutely delicious. The chicken came out nice and tender and the veggies cooked perfectly. Those zucchinis caramelized and it made them so tasty. Next, I am cooking up some steak fajitas. So I got this steak on clearance. So it's been sitting in my freezer for quite some time and I was looking for a reason to use it up, and this is perfect. So I'm just cutting it up against the grain into small strips. Any sort of steak can be used here, but my favorite is definitely the cheap steak that I get on clearance. Now I'm just going to take a small yellow onion and get it chopped up just into half moons. I'm going to spread the steak and the onions evenly over my sheet pans. Next, I have some peppers that I previously had chopped up and frozen, and now they are just so easy to pop onto my sheet pans. We love our mushrooms here, so I am just going to chop up a few white cremini mushrooms and get them on the pan with my other ingredients. Now I'm going to make my own taco seasoning. So together I am putting in some chili powder, some garlic powder, some cumin, and some paprika. So I'm going to take some olive oil now and spread it evenly throughout both of my pans. It's about a tablespoon per pan, but you can use less if you need to. Then I'm going to take my taco seasoning and also just spread it all over all of the ingredients. This goes in the oven at 425 for 20 to 30 minutes or until everything is cooked thoroughly. Once these are done, you put them in some wraps and season them as you like. Finally, I am preparing a pork chop dinner. So I am starting off with some sweet potatoes that I have cubed up into small pieces. I'm evenly putting them on my pans and then coating them with some olive oil, about a tablespoon per pan. Now I'm going to season with some salt and some pepper. When that's done, we're just going to mix them up so that the seasonings can get all over all of the potatoes. Then I'm just going to pre-cook these for 5 to 10 minutes on 400, just to soften them up because everything else cooks quickly. Next, I'm just going to push them back to make some room for our other ingredients. I'm going to grab some thinly sliced pork chops and get 3 placed on each of my sheet pans. I'm just taking some frozen vegetables, a mixture of broccoli, cauliflower, beans, and carrots, and I'm just going to put them at the end of my sheet pans here. You can use whatever vegetables that you like in this dish. Next, I'm going to take about 2 tablespoons of olive oil and spread it evenly over my vegetables and my pork chops. I'm just putting it over the pork chops and vegetables, as the sweet potatoes have already been seasoned. Now I'm taking some salt and some pepper and spreading it evenly over both the pork chops and the vegetables. Next, I'm just going to spread the olive oil and the seasonings evenly over my pork chops. You could flip them over and do both sides if you want, but I will be flipping these mid-cooking time just to make sure that they cook evenly on both sides, and then both sides will be in the oil and the juices on the bottom. These go in the oven at 420 for 15 to 20 minutes or until the meat and potatoes are cooked thoroughly. This was an absolutely delicious dinner. We are starting off with meatless baked beans. So I'm taking 1 onion and dicing it up, 2 garlics, and 4 small carrots, dicing them up into small pieces. Then I'm going to get them into my pan with a little bit of olive oil, and I'm going to saute them down until they're soft and just about caramelized. In my slow cooker, I'm going to take 3 cans of pinto beans. I'm using cans because today is one of those days where I don't have the time to take dried beans and soak them and cook them. So those cans are going into my slow cooker along with 1 can of tomato sauce, 3 tablespoons of mustard, 2 tablespoons of tomato paste, which I missed getting a video of, but it is in there. To that, I am adding 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar, and then 1/3 cup of maple syrup, and 1/3 cup of brown sugar. You then add salt to taste. And then once my carrots, onions, and garlic are fried up nicely, I put them into my slow cooker and mix everything around. Then I put my slow cooker on low and I leave it for 3 hours. Canned baked beans have nothing on this recipe. It was so aromatic and so delicious. They were very sweet but savory along with those caramelized onions. It was so incredibly tasty. Definitely one to add to the weekly routine. The next recipe I am making is a newer recipe for me, but it is one that I absolutely adore. Indian cooking has a lot of the really delicious plant-based cooking, which is also very budget friendly. So I decided to take a little foray into the Indian cuisine and try a curry. So this is a lentil curry. I took 1 onion and 4 to 5 garlic cloves and chopped them up. Then I get them into my pot with about a tablespoon of coconut oil. You can use regular oil if you don't have coconut oil. I also add 2 teaspoons of ginger, half teaspoon of turmeric, half teaspoon of cumin, 1 teaspoon of garam masala, 2 teaspoons of curry powder, and stir it all together so the flavors combine. To that, I add 1 cup. You can use crushed tomatoes. I didn't have any crushed tomatoes, so I just used 1 can of tomato sauce. Then I added 1 can of coconut milk. Again, if you don't have coconut milk, you can just use a cup of regular milk. Then I added in 3 cups of lentils, dried lentils, and added 3 cups of vegetable broth. I let it simmer for about a half an hour until everything was well cooked. I made sure those lentils were really well cooked. It was an amazing, delicious dish, one I'm definitely adding to the weekly list. Our last dish here is a roasted chickpea sheet pan meal with a balsamic vinegar and maple glaze. So I have taken 4 small sweet potatoes, a bunch of Brussels sprouts, and 1 onion and chopped them all up into about equal sizes. I add them all to a sheet pan and make sure they're distributed evenly. Then I take one of my jarred chickpeas and add it to the sheet pan. I do not drain my chickpeas as the aquafaba will act like an oil on the vegetables. Now to make the vinegar maple glaze, I'm adding 1/4 cup of balsamic vinegar, 1/4 cup of soy sauce. I take 1 tablespoon of maple syrup and make sure I spill that absolutely everywhere. Maple syrup's like gold, so you don't want to waste that. Then I take 1 teaspoon of garlic and I mix it all up until it's properly combined. After that, I just spread it over my chickpea and vegetable mixture. Once I have that evenly over everything, I'm just going to take a spoon and combine it all. Once it's combined, I'm going to put it in my oven at 425 degrees Fahrenheit, and I leave it in there for about a half an hour until the vegetables and the potatoes are fully cooked. About halfway through, you can give everything a turn just to make sure it cooks evenly. And then once it's done, you're just going to want to plate it all up. This was delicious. I absolutely adore that maple vinaigrette glaze. It made the potatoes caramelize beautifully, if you can see here. It left just this wonderful texture on the potatoes and the chickpeas and everything, and it was just so delicious. So I hope this is one that you guys enjoy. So I'm going to take half of this chicken and save half for another night and use half now. I'm going to take 2 of these and put it in a pot and make some chicken soup. I love grabbing these cheap chicken legs and making soup from them, as it is a very nutritious, filling, and budget-friendly meal to make. By boiling the meat in the water, I can make a nice meat stock with it, and then the chicken is cooked, so I can just take the chicken off the bone, but the flavor from the bone and the skin is in the water. So I just have that chicken simmering for about an hour to make sure that the meat stock is nice and flavorful. While that is cooking, I take 1 of our onions and 4 of our carrots and I dice them up nice and small for the soup. And then once the chicken is all done in the meat stock, I just take it out of the broth and let it cool down a bit so I can shred the chicken off the bone. And then I just add my onion and my carrot into the broth. And I turn the broth on medium so that the onions and the carrots can start to cook. Next, I go ahead and get 5 of our potatoes and dice them up and get them in with the broth as well. Potatoes are a cheap and filling option you can add to pretty much any dish. To season the soup, I add about a teaspoon of salt, and then I go in and I add about a half cup to a cup of our frozen spinach. I then go in and add about a teaspoon of thyme as well. So by now the chicken has cooled down and I'm able to take the skin off and shred the chicken off the bone so that I can add it to our soup. I leave the soup on medium until everything has cooked through thoroughly. This takes about a half an hour. The finished soup is so flavorful and so filling, absolutely delicious and great on a winter's night. All right, so for the next night, I'm getting together a sausage pasta. So I go ahead and get 1 of our onions and our pepper and I dice it up and get it into my frying pan so I can start to saute these. If you have a little bit of oil, you can add oil to this. If not, a little bit of water will keep it from sticking. So I take 2 of our sausages because I'm going to split up the package, and I just cut them down into about 1-inch pieces and I add them to the frying pan so that I can saute them all up and get them cooked. While those are cooking, I'm going to go ahead and get my pasta water on, and once it's boiling, I add about half of my bag of pasta. I let that cook for about 9 minutes, and then I drain the pasta and add it all back into my pot. And then I just scoop in my fillings, my sausage, onion, and pepper into my pasta. I make sure I get all the juices because that's where the flavor is. Then I take my jar of tomato sauce, I empty that in, I rinse it out with a little bit of water to make sure I get every last bit of tomato sauce, and then I dump that in as well. Give it a good stir. Now you can use whatever spices you like to flavor this. We just used a bit of salt, and then this was delicious. It's absolutely a kid favorite. The kids love this. They call it hot dog pasta, even though it's with sausages. All right, moving along to our next dinner, I am doing a chicken potato casserole bake in the slow cooker. These potatoes are a bit smaller, so I took 7 of the potatoes. Again, potatoes are a really budget-friendly filling food that also has a lot of nutrition in them. I add them to my slow cooker. I take an onion and I take about 5 or 6 carrots, dice them up, and get them into my slow cooker as well. To this, I add about a half a cup to a cup of the frozen spinach. And then on top, I just add my 2 chicken breasts. So I like the saying of using meat as a seasoning, not as a main dish. And I find that to be incredibly budget friendly when I do that. To this, I add about a quarter cup of water, a little bit of salt, then some garlic powder, some chili powder, and finally some cumin. This adds a bit of a taco flavoring to our bake. Then I just leave this on low for about 6 to 8 hours until everything is well cooked. That chicken will fall right off the bone. I decided to take it out of the slow cooker to shred the chicken because I didn't want to accidentally leave any bones in there with the rest of the ingredients. So I just took them off on a plate. I took the skin off as the flavoring from the skin that went into the meal nicely while it was slow cooking. And then I just shred the chicken from the bone so I can add it back into the slow cooker. When that's done, I just take the shredded chicken, add it back to the pot, give it a good stir, and serve it up. This was also a really tasty dish, really easy to put together. I love a slow cooker for that reason. However, I would probably add less water as it was still a bit watery in the bottom. So I think if you just grease the bottom of your slow cooker, it would be more of a bake. But this still turned out really delicious and definitely one I will be doing again. All right, so the next dish is very simple. I'm just putting together my version of a bangers and mash. So we're doing the rest of our potatoes. I think I had 5 potatoes here. And I'm just going to get them into a pot of water and boil them and mash them. You'll notice that I do leave my skins on my potatoes. That is a preference for some, whether they have them peeled or not. For me, there's a lot of nutrition in the peel and a lot of fiber, so I leave them on there. Then I boil up carrots as a side, and I get my sausages in the frying pan to cook. Once the potatoes have cooked until fork tender, I mash them up. If you have some milk and butter, you can put it in here. If you do not, then you can just use some of the potato water to keep the potatoes moist. I have cooked the carrots until tender, and the sausage, everybody got a half a sausage, and it was a delicious and easy meal. Lastly, I am taking the bacon we bought and I'm just cutting it into about inch-size pieces. I am going to put together a bacon pasta dish with the rest of our pasta. So, like I said, I'm just going to cut up our bacon, separate it so it can all cook evenly, and get it in the frying pan to go. Next, I'm going to take one of our onions, dice it up, and get it into the frying pan with our bacon. It's so surprising to me that bacon is now more of a budget item for me, where I can get it for $2 to $3 a package, where bacon used to be like a luxury or a frivolity that you could give up. But now it seems to be one of the protein sources that is actually affordable. As that's cooking, I boil some water and get the rest of our pasta in there to cook. And as the pasta is cooking, I go ahead and add in about half a cup to a cup of the frozen spinach. I was left with about a cup of the frozen spinach as leftover. To the bacon, I also add about a teaspoon of garlic powder as well as a teaspoon of basil. Once the pasta is all fully cooked, I drain it out, put it back into my pot, and add in the bacon, onion, spinach mixture. Then I just give it a good stir until everything is combined, and I can serve it up after that. Again, this is another kid hit. The kids love bacon, so anything with bacon is a win. So during this week, I did go through all of the ingredients I had, although I did have a couple of onions left and about a cup of frozen spinach, but everything else got used up, with the amount being about $6 per meal. Thank you everybody for joining me here today. Make sure you check out my channel for more budget meals and frugal living ideas. I will link my frugal living playlist here so that you can check out all the videos that I have on frugal hacks. If you are looking for more ideas on saving money on your groceries, I will also link my budget meal playlist in the description box. I hope you are well, and I will see you all next time.